I'm Alex Howard.
And I'm Amanda Silver, and this is Dirty Laundry.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So you're so nervous.
You're giggling already.
Well, I'm laughing because I'm wondering if this is like a introvert-extrovert thing or a male-female thing or if I'm just nuts or all of the above.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're like out, let's say you're at the gym.
Okay.
And you see, common people, you go to like the class at the same time or whatever. You see some familiar faces and you're like, hey, what's up? Just being polite. At what point do you, if ever, introduce yourself and go up to them and be like, oh, hi, by the way, I'm Amanda. Nice to meet you. Is that something you would ever consider doing?
What do you mean introduce yourself? You've already met them.
No, but you haven't really met them by name. You're just like, oh, hi, familiar friend at the gym. Hey, how are ya?
I don't think about that.
Like you get friendly enough whereby you are chatting.
Yeah.
But you haven't like crossed that threshold of introducing.
Sometimes I'll say, by the way, I'm Amanda.
Okay, so you will. Or will you wait for them?
Doesn't happen that often. Because I feel
that you introduce yourself?
I feel like by that point, it's like it's too awkward because it's like you don't want to ask their name and you know that you don't know their name and they don't know your name, but it's becoming awkward. So you just sit in the awkwardness and you
so
just
then
keep
I
going.
do wonder if it's a man thing. Because I find, and this is not tooting my
horn,
like people
more
are picking
likely
me
to
up.
introduce themselves
I think so.
than women.
I think so.
And women, interesting.
Because I will literally go for years never knowing someone's name.
No, because
never sharing mine.
It gets to a point where I'm thinking about parents at the school.
Okay,
so like
great
other
example.
moms. So I'm like, hi, I know you're like Josh's mom or whatever, Braden's mom, but I'm like, but I don't remember your name.
But if you've never been introduced, even
you've never really been officially introduced, but like you're just like you've seen them, seen them for years at the playground, and you can't be like, oh, by the way, I'm Amanda.
Right,
it's too late for that. But I also think that because of social media, if you follow each other, you figure out people's names anyways.
Yeah. You've skipped far ahead in this anecdote. I'm really I will never introduce myself.
Ever.
Very rarely, unless someone introduces themselves first. And I'm like, oh, I'm, so-and-so. But I often wonder if it's just like a weird social thing that I'm like not interested in engaging but I think it's more of Ryan, do you ever introduce yourself?
I would never do that in a million years.
You would never introduce yourself?
No. But I think there's different dynamics at different gyms. There's kind of the open gym dynamic where everybody's squatting, everyone's doing their own thing. You might run into someone and like, oh, you look familiar. But then there's the class dynamic. I think if you're taking a class with the same people consistently, I feel like then maybe you would just be like, oh, hey, I'm Brian, by the way, whatever. And then you have like the class in common and then you can just like talk about the class.
Yeah.
If I'm squatting and somebody's like doing some hip thrust beside me, I'm not going up to them being like, hey, I'm Ryan. How are you?
Great thrust.
Mid-hip thrust. I like to make friends at the gym.
And I never want to make a friend. It's
I like
my
to make
mission.
friends.
I don't
like
make eye
to talk.
contact.
I like to introduce. I like to like if I bring someone to the gym, I have to introduce them to people.
Oh goodness!
But there is that awkwardness of like the person who's been in the same class as you for months, but you've never actually said a word to them, and you just smile and keep going.
Always smile and keep going.
Just smile and keep going.
That's my
it's just like it's just forever will be that. That relationship.
Yeah, funny.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's neither gendered nor introverted. I have no conclusion to this
personal
anecdote.
choice, I guess. Personal preference. So today on Dirty Laundry, we have Breanne, Diary of a People Pleaser. Breanne's going to come on and teach us all about boundary setting, saying no, and learning to put yourself first. So welcome, Breanne. Diary of a People Pleaser. I love the name.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. It's so good.
good.
And people pleasing is something that we talk about a lot.
Yes, mostly because I am very much
You're a
people
self-diagnosed people pleaser. And I think you have opened up my eyes to my people-pleasing nature. Yes. Just by hearing you talk about yourself, I'm like, I can relate. I never thought about it that way.
So what was your journey to discovering your people-pleasing tendencies? How does one become an expert in this very fun field?
Honestly, I was in my 30s and I had never even heard of boundaries. I kind of, when I thought, oh, I'm a people pleaser, I thought, okay, I'd really like to just make people happy. And that's a really great quality of mine. And I'm so, easygoing. And I thought it was a good thing. And so when I had my third son, I was really struggling with postpartum anxiety. And I was feeling very lost. And I was feeling lonely, and I was feeling that on my personal Instagram account, I was like, I don't even want to post a picture of me alone without kids, because I was so worried that people were going to be judging me and like, look at her, she's so conceited, she's posting a picture of herself. I was so worried about the judgments of other people that I didn't even know how to be an authentic version of myself. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to create a brand new Instagram account, a diary where I can just completely be myself. I can be authentic because I don't know anybody. Like if I'm attracting random people in the Instagram sphere, I don't worry about the judgments of strangers. I really don't. It's the people often that are closest to us or who know us that we struggle with. And so through there, I just started uncovering more about, like what is at the root of anxiety. And for a lot of people, it's people pleasing. And I was like, what's this? And started reading more about it and, just about trauma, and just it kind of unlocks a whole universe of things. And I'm just a passionate psychology lover, and I just dove into it, and here we are.
And we're so grateful that you did, because you're uncovering all the secrets for the rest of us.
And making people, you're offering sort of a mirror where people reflect back onto themselves and we're like, aha, that's me. That's me.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to, how do you know if you're a people pleaser? What are the signs?
What are the red flags?
Yeah. Like, how do you know?
I mean, when I reflect back on my life, I'm like, okay, let's say, for example, my friends want to watch a movie and I suggest the movie. I couldn't even enjoy the movie because I was so worried that they were going to hate the movie and that they would be upset with me. Like, why would you choose? I couldn't even be present in the moment because I put so much pressure. All those little tiny things, right? Or it's like you let everybody else pick the restaurant because you don't want to have a bad experience for them and then they think poorly of you, or you just have a hard time saying no or expressing yourself, or if what you're saying is going to maybe upset the other person, even though you're not wrong, you will hold that back because you just cannot fathom them being upset with you. And so you're constantly suffocating your own needs to meet the needs of other people. You don't know who you are, I think, is the biggest thing. A lot of people feel very lost because when you're constantly trying to meet the needs of other people, you don't really know your own needs and who you are. And so it's kind of this shape shifting where you're like, oh, you like skiing? Okay, now I like skiing. And, oh, you are into this, so I'm into this. Or I don't care, whatever you want. And so you're always putting your own needs last, and your own identity is something that gets lost in there.
Yeah.
So
I think that really
signs.
happens in relationships too.
It definitely does.
Which is often the demise, I think, of a relationship.
Well, or you end up with the wrong person, because if you don't even know yourself, how in the world can you show up authentically in a relationship, in a partnership? And parenting, I find too, is often kind of like that. For me, that was what really made me realize, oh my God, what in the world? Who even am I? When people are like, okay, you're done having your kids, go back to your hobbies. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want to do for fun. What I do know, and it's funny you mentioned the dinner, like picking a restaurant. I would tell people, I'm like, listen, I need you to pick it, because if I do, I'm going to have a horrible time.
Yeah.
So I would sooner go to a place with food I don't like, because then I could actually be more at ease.
You have to carry the burden. It's
such a
burden for you. A social responsibility. You feel everyone's happiness is on you. Everyone's experience is on you.
And it's not. Like, that's the wildest thing. Once you start talking about it, people are like, I didn't even notice or care. Or like,
it's a very internal pressure. And I mean, sometimes it's driven by someone externally, and, sometimes a parent or caregiver can be the driver of that in certain relationships, or even a spouse, but most of it is internally. And so when you start to undo that, you start to see how your relationships start to flourish, and they become more honest and beautiful and respectful. And I think in relationships, when you people please, you think you're happy because you're making other people happy. But at the end of the day, we all have needs, and a lot of people end up being very resentful.
Yes.
And I think this is what happens in the marriages, right? Is that, you are constantly sacrificing and that other person is not giving it back.
Yeah.
But they didn't ask you to make all these sacrifices for them either, right? That's something you're doing on yourself. So there's a lot of resentment that builds up by our own doing.
So you've tied it to anxiety. You've tied it to maybe like early childhood development. Is there, and maybe you don't even know this answer, but like an actual root or a diagnosis or something,
that causes this? Like, what's the cause of people pleasing? Is there one cause?
It's kind of like that nature versus nurture conversation, right? And every person is going to come out of a different circumstance with different traits. You know, like you could take two kids that are in the same environment and one might become a people pleaser just because maybe they were a deeper feeler, they developed more empathy, and maybe another one becomes a little bit more careless and reckless and they start like acting out, right? So there's different ways that we develop in these circumstances, but usually what happens with people pleasing is maybe you watched your parents people please. Maybe that's just something that was demonstrating to you. You picked it up. It's not that they were necessarily saying you need to do these things, but you watch that that's how they live their life and that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Because kids model what they see. And other times it can be a parent or a caregiver just sort of steamrolling you. And when you do speak your needs, and I know that this happened a lot in past generations. And I think this is why our generation is the one to sort of stand up and say, like, you know, I'm a people pleaser and this is wrong. But it used to be, you know, I'm the parent and you're the child and my needs matter more and you just be quiet. And so that sort of taught children that they should just suck up how they feel. They should put other people first. And then another area is just if you grow up in a home that just doesn't feel safe or consistent, you know, you might have a parent that has an easy temper. They might blow up. You might learn that you need to do certain things or act a certain way or read the room just in order to keep everything balanced and to feel safe. So there's different ways that it can be developed, and it just depends on the kid. In childhood, at some point, you felt unsafe, you felt insecure, you felt that love was conditional. And as a child, you'll do what you can to feel safe and to feel loved and to have the acceptance and approval of the people that matter most to you. And so we take that into our adult relationships as well, where now we think that we need to do that all the time in order, like A plus B equals C. If I people please and they're happy with me, I will feel loved and safe and worthy, really, and valued.
So can you follow the thread back to your own childhood?
Yeah, I think this is where it can be challenging for some people. And the biggest hurdle that I had to get over in my own recovery journey was acknowledging that even though I have great, loving parents and I grew up, I had a good childhood, there were still things that hurt, or there were still needs that weren't met, or there was still some like manipulation or guilt that I think just a lot of parents fall into just because it's easy or it's what they were taught. And so I really had to come to the understanding that I needed to validate that within myself and to say, even though they maybe didn't mean to, or even though there was a lot of really great things, these things didn't get done or these things did get done. And that affected how I learned to respond. And I don't blame my parents. It's not an angry thing. And I think that's something I try to speak on too. It's that, you know, we can acknowledge our hurts and what we didn't receive without being angry at those people.
So has that affected your relationship with your family of origin, or are you?
No, I think that there was a era of discomfort where I started to set some boundaries and there was a lot of shock and pushback. And, you know, they got used to me always backing down and doing what they wanted. And now I wasn't doing that anymore. And then that was something that they had to shift and work on. And I think that's something that's really important for people to consider when they're going to start setting boundaries in their existing relationships, is that it won't always be easy and you will probably get some pushback, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. So it's important to recognize what's normal pushback and then what's toxic behavior. So, you know, people get used to you being a certain way. And when you're going to go in and just change that on them, that is going to be something that they're going to have to navigate as well.
Yeah.
So we can't just say, you know, I'm not going to be a people pleaser anymore. I'm going to start setting boundaries and you better get used to it. And they just have to like suck it up, right? That's not fair either. So we have to allow grace in our shift and transformation as well. But when people are continuously disrespecting your boundaries and not accepting you and really making it a struggle without any sort of give or respect, then that's where you have to look at if it's a healthy relationship. And for a lot of people, that either their parent or their spouse or their friend can be an emotionally immature person or a narcissistic personality, and they're just not going to change. So that's something, you know, like in my circumstance, and it's important for me to validate this for anybody who's listening. In my circumstance, I can say, you know, my parents did the best that they could, and it wasn't malicious, and there was just things that they didn't really realize. But for a lot of people, their parents didn't really do the best they could, and they were hurtful and selfish and self-driven. And, you know, it's important to validate the fact that that hurts too. And that you deserve to have that and you didn't. And so everybody comes from a different circumstance, and it's just important to validate that for those people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is really important. And with all relationships, with all families, everyone's is different.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with respecting the difference and not having it on some kind of like hierarchy or attaching any sort of judgment to it. It's just simply, okay, that's working for you or that's not working. That's just your story. This is mine. And sort of having that respect. So thank you. I do appreciate that. It's really hard. How did that show up for you in romantic relationships?
Yeah, so being a people pleaser, and so people pleasing and codependency are very aligned. So they have some differences, but you know, people pleasing can easily slip into codependency where you literally feel responsible for other people, or you kind of turn into a saver. And so for me, I always was choosing men that needed saving. They needed help. They needed, you know, someone strong to like carry them, or, you know, if they had childhood trauma or hard past, then I could just like love that. I could heal it with my love. You know, I felt responsible for that. So instead of choosing people that were emotionally healthy and emotionally available and, you know, capable of loving in a certain way, I always chose people that were quote unquote broken. And you, or I should say, pay the price for that, right? And so there's something to be said though, when people are people pleasing or they feel codependency in their life, they often have low self-worth and low self-esteem. So it can even be challenging to choose healthy partners because there's something inside of you that just doesn't feel worthy of that love. It's almost like someone being good to you and it being easy, it feels uncomfortable. And so a lot of times people choose toxic partners. And you just continue
or they repeat
cycle.
the same. They repeat the cycle. So let's say they have left a relationship with someone who's toxic, and they don't actually figure out what the problem was. They repeat it. And they find the same kind of person, and then they're like, "How does it happen again?"
And you're right. If it was easy, it would be like, well, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm just constantly waiting for it's too good to be true. And self-worth is definitely plays a huge component in that. That's so tricky. I'm gonna not make this all about me. I promise. Like, yes, this is very familiar. I used to brag about that I was a chameleon, that I could go into any circumstance and I could talk to anyone, and it didn't matter what their education level was, what their interests were. It didn't matter. I could turn it on. I could talk. I could be in any room with anybody and I would just, turn it on. And I'm like, no, that is not healthy. People don't want a chameleon with no personality that just adopts whatever theirs is. They want somebody who is interesting, has a life of their own, interests of their own, all that sort of stuff. So having that shift and growth is also, you look back and you're like, man, the things that I thought were, I guess, achievements or something to brag about was actually just serious coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Masquerading, you know?
That's
Some people
it.
never
And
realize it. They just go through their life like that.
Yeah.
And they
Well, that's
never are aware of it. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just understanding that in different circumstances, those traits can still benefit you. So to be a chameleon and go into a room, like that sounds really great professionally and for business, but is it going to give you authentic relationships for people that are close to you? No, right? So that's where we have to learn how to be vulnerable and be authentic and be ourselves and allow people the choice to either accept that about ourselves or walk out, right? So many people are so afraid of losing that person if they show who they are. And I just got to a point where I was like, I would rather lose you than not be myself anymore. So I'm going to put all my cards on the table and we're going to see where we stand. And if you're not good with it or you're not able to respect that, then I'm willing to let you go.
Where do you even start with boundaries? Like, how can you start setting up boundaries in your life?
Yeah, I always tell people to start easy and slow. So in the beginning, when we were talking about the restaurant choice, you know, some way to start activating your voice would be to choose the restaurant. And it might feel uncomfortable and you might worry, like, are they going to hate it? Is it going to be a bad experience for them? But you do it anyways. There's a lot of doing it anyways in this process. It feels scary. It feels uncomfortable. It goes against everything that you've been doing for probably most of your life, but you have to push yourself through it. And so I just say, you know, start picking the movie, picking the restaurant, you know, saying no to the friend. And, you know, in an area of my life that I realized I really struggled with was because I didn't have a lot of friendships, I wanted to hold those ones so close. So, for example, if they were like, hey, I'm going through something and I really need to chat right now, I would have like jumped through hoops and, you know, kids can go, everything else can go. I like had to be there in that moment because I was so worried that if I didn't do that, they would go talk to someone else. Now that would be their bestie. They wouldn't want to talk to me anymore. And so I would play that out in my head. And so I would be ready for anybody at any point. And then I had to start saying to myself, like, I'm a valuable person. I'm a good friend. It's a lot of self-talk too. And, you know, I offer great advice. I'm there. I'm reliable. And they're going to still value me even if I can't be available in this moment. That doesn't change our relationship and the type of friend that I am. And if it does, well, then it wasn't as meaningful as I thought. So it's a lot of this like talking yourself off the ledge and this self-talk of how to just say no or not be available for everybody all the time. And so that's really a good place to start. And then from there, once you start to get confidence, once you start to see that your friends or your family or your spouse actually respects and enjoys knowing your boundaries, then you start to feel a little bit more empowerment. Like for me and my friendships, I love that someone can say, you know, this is their hard line. And I'm like, wow, I like respect you so much more. And I feel more comfortable as your friend knowing that that's your line, because how often in our friendships are we like, are they mad at us? Did we do something? Did this happen? But when there's clear communication and respect, it's like everybody just feels way more confident.
Yeah, and safe. I think that's it. It's the boundaries actually make you feel safer. It's like now we're all playing by the same rules and we know what the rules are.
And your nervous system isn't like activated, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I have a friend and she, anytime we go over for dinner or whatever, it's like we all know by 7 p.m. we're getting kicked out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what time you come over. It's like, nope, 7, you know, whatever. And it was even earlier, obviously, when her kids were younger, but there is a cutoff point and everyone knows that. And nobody's bothered by it. We're all like, okay, our expectations are in check. We know exactly the parameters. And so until, 6:59, it's a hootenanny. And then, all right, shoes on, hit the door.
Yeah.
But people do think typically with boundaries, it is this negative experience. And it's so difficult. And so when you start putting those boundaries up, when you start practicing, using them and enforcing them, it is typically with the people that you are the most pleasing to.
Yeah.
So you do get that pushback. I'll never forget my mom. Like when I started this work, so I went back to school and I was learning all about boundaries and this, and I started putting them up. And the first things she said to me, she was like, "Oh, I liked you way more before you went to school." And I'm like, I know, line. Like classic mom, right? Like it was total classic. And I'm like, yes, because I bent over backwards for you all the time. And that was our dynamic. And now all of a sudden I've changed the rules of our relationship. So it does take time, and we've come, very far in our relationship, and it's all good now. But how do you then gain the confidence when you start getting that pushback from the people that you're supposed to feel the most loved and safe with?
And your worst fears are coming true.
And your worst fears
because
are
your
coming
worst
true.
fears are they're going to be upset with me.
Yeah.
They're not going to take it well.
Yeah.
And then they're upset
And
with
they
you
are,
and they
yeah.
don't take it well.
Yeah.
So then what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is the probably most challenging part, right? And this is where strength comes in. And this is why when you're working on setting boundaries, you have to do a lot of healing. You could do some trauma therapy, self-esteem and self-worth development, because those things have to ride along the boundaries with you. Because if you don't believe that you're worth setting these boundaries, it's going to be really hard for you to hold on to. So you have to really strengthen and find grounding in who you are and what you deserve to hold up those boundaries. And so, it's just one of those things that you just have to push through. And you have to know that the boundary is going to help you more than it's going to hurt you. So if you have this, exactly. If you have this circumstance that requires a boundary, I always tell my clients, think about in 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 6 years. If you don't set that boundary, what is the relationship going to look like? How are you going to feel? Imagine that, okay? And then that's usually not a great circumstance. And then imagine that you get through this uncomfortable period with setting this boundary, and it's, something you have to navigate. Maybe it doesn't go how you want. But on the other side of that, which one is better?
Yeah.
And that is usually enough to make that jump.
And maybe forgive yourself when you do fail, right? When you do let someone trample that boundary, because it's inevitable, especially in the beginning, because it's a new skill. And so, I think offering yourself some grace too would be like, ooh, should have held on to that one a little tougher, but okay, I've learned for next time.
Exactly. But it's almost the same as parenting too, right? It's like if your kid is throwing a tantrum, it's like you got to hold strong, because as soon as you give in, like the kids learn now, okay, if I just do it enough, and that's the same as the person on the other side of the boundary. It's like if I throw a big enough tantrum, they will just give in. And so it's the same sort of technique that you have to take in and be like, I have to hold this. Otherwise, they're going to just learn that they can just keep doing it.
So how does it show up for you in parenting? You mentioned 3 boys.
No, 3 kids, but
3 kids. Okay. 3 kids.
Um,
It sounds like you were sort of learning on the job.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? Touche.
Aren't we all learning on the job?
That's exactly
as parents?
it. Yes. I started implementing it with my friends first, just because I really value my female friendships. As we're getting older, I think that female friendships become even more important. So I really wanted to see who's on my team and who's not, and I really wanted to, for lack of better words, level up my friendships. I didn't want to just keep entertaining and putting my energy into people that didn't respect me or who weren't in it. I wanted to level up and have amazing, good quality women in my life who respect boundaries and appreciate that and think that I'm incredible and strong because I have them, so it was an easy route for me to start implementing the boundaries. Kids, I mean, they're ruthless. I have to say, like, it is hard to set boundaries with
It
kids.
really is hard to set boundaries
It
with
is.
kids.
They are master pushers and negotiators, and it's a challenge, but I think it's, for me, actually one of the biggest things that I've worked on with people pleasing and what I'm demonstrating to my kids is through these friendships, because they saw me lose a few friendships and they wanted to know why. And that was a great opportunity to have these discussions and lead by example of when you're not feeling respected or people aren't, listening to your boundaries and they're continuing to do certain behaviors that hurt you. Like, it's better to walk away and find new friendships and, value yourself. And so I got to, through example, show that to them. And I'm hoping that that will be something that they take into their friendship and their lives. And to rest. That was something that, people pleasers chronically struggle with, because we feel that our productivity is tied to, our worth. And it's difficult to rest and relax when you feel like you always have to be hustling and like doing something for other people so that they're happy with you. And so I really tried to take a bath or say, no, I can't play. I'm just too tired right now. I'm at my limit. I have to have some rest now, and start to show them that you don't always have to be doing everything for everybody else.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I try to, as a recovering people pleaser, try to instill in my kids is not everyone's going to like you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. You're not going to like everyone. There's just different personalities, right? Because for me, it was always like, well, if they don't like me, I need to conform to whatever version that they could like.
Yeah.
And so it's this constant manipulation, again, of like, who even am I? I don't know. I'm lost in just trying to figure out what others need from me or want from me.
Yeah.
And so once you start saying, you know what, it's okay, that I'm just not their cup of tea. It's been very liberating. And as a parent, I'm like, oh, this is definitely something. You don't need to invite every kid in your class to your birthday party if you don't like them.
Yeah.
And if they're not kind to you, we're not having them to our house,
We talk about the difference between being kind and being nice.
Because nice is performative. Yeah. Nice is people pleasing.
Yeah.
Nice kindness is putting someone else first. And not ignoring your own needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's like, when we went back and talked about childhood, right? Those are those key moments where it's like, okay, you have your toy and someone else wants it, so give it to them.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I don't want to give it to them. And it's like, you need to do it. And so right in those moments, without saying, be a people pleaser and sacrifice your needs for other people, we are demonstrating just in what we're asking them to do and how they need to react to other people. And so sometimes it's so subconscious that we don't even really fully know until we start to look into it about, oh my gosh, that's why I do this. Or, you got to go on a deep dive.
So for a lot of our listeners, they're going through separation and divorce. This is a time when we are abandoning a lot of things. It's very emotional, and it's a tricky time. One of the questions I always ask before meeting with clients together, we do like a one-on-one intake, and I always ask them, how confident are you in your ability to self-advocate, to stand up and state what you need, what you want, like to really fight for, your rights in this divorce? For those that really struggle, what are some just sort of easy tips that they could look to just at least at minimum navigate that process before they, go back to therapy and do all the really important work that needs to be done?
Just speaking up for themselves.
Just to find their voice throughout that process.
I think a big thing that can be helpful, especially if you're a parent, is your why. So when I set this boundary, what am I hoping to get from it? Am I just wanting to have a mutual respect within our co-parenting? Are we trying to set a good example for our kids? What am I trying to get from this boundary? And really ground into that, because at the end of the day, when you're trying to set a boundary, it usually is for good intention and good purpose. And looking at yourself, at your inner child, can be something that can be helpful if you don't have children yourself. It's like, okay, what does my inner child need, and how can I protect that part of myself? And it's an opportunity to, be the adult for your inner self. And sometimes as an adult, stepping into that protective role, that can be motivation. You're like, okay, I'm the adult here and I have to protect this version of myself. And so I'm going to do that. It just it activates this protectiveness over you. So that could be
I like that. It's almost, instead of trying to, let's say, beat your people-pleasing tendencies, it's like lean into them. If you have enough self-awareness to know that this is something that you're struggling with, don't do it for you. Do it for the kids.
Yeah.
Or do it for the little version of you, right? For those that don't have kids. I think that's really helpful, because we can only grow so much, only change so much. And in the throes of a divorce, maybe that's not time to do your biggest. Or maybe it is. I mean, it could go both ways.
To look inwards during that.
It's hard. It's really hard to look inwards.
So many emotions.
So much going on.
It's more when the dust has settled.
That's the time to do the work.
Reflect.
Yeah.
That's the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is more like, okay, to your point, what's your why? Well, if you are, fighting for the kids to be in whatever, this school or this, whatever that is, that's the time where, you bring out your sort of mama bear and your protectiveness, and you actually lean in to the people pleasing, and your, let's say, clients are the kids. You're going to do whatever it takes for them.
Yeah.
It's a good approach. Yeah.
Yeah. And a great reminder is, it's easier to set the boundaries now than to give in for the next 5-10 years and then try to change the boundaries. It's like, okay, this is almost like a fresh start. And so go into it with how you want things to look, because this is something that's going to be for the rest of your life, or for at least the rest of your children's lives until they're adults, and maybe things will change.
I've seen so many times where it's actually quite amazing to see. Often it's with women, and maybe it's a gendered thing, where, you meet with the husband and he describes her as being very, they've had a traditional marriage. He was the decision maker. He presents her as sort of submissive. And then you meet with her and you bring them both together, and she's just a powerhouse.
Right.
And comes at it and it's like, enough is enough. This is what I want. And he's kind of taken it back. And I'm like, she's found her voice. And isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Because for so long in this marriage, she has been pleasing and conceding and and now there's been a change.
Yeah.
And she gets her power back. And to me, that's an incredible thing to see and be like, look, here she is self-advocating.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Do you think, Breanne, that people kind of get to that point where it's like I guess a different version of like a rock bottom, where you are becoming extremely resentful and you're unhappy, you're quick to anger, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, something has got to change because I can't live like this anymore. Yeah, I would imagine that's fairly common. And then you hit the point of divorce and you're like, okay, well, enough's enough. We're clearly at the end. What have I got to do?
And there's nothing left to save. I think once you remove that, I think people are so worried about that abandonment, that rejection. Once that's off the table, you're already splitting up. Now you could just be yourself.
Yeah, nothing to lose.
And just, there's nothing to lose anymore. And now you can just advocate for yourself.
And I think so often what people struggle with in relationships and in people pleasing in general is that they think that they're setting a boundary, but they're actually just tiptoeing around what they would like very, discreetly. And as we know, not all, but many men need very clear and obvious direction. They don't pick up on the hints often. And so I've had clients, sometimes it could even be at work. It's like, I'm setting these boundaries and they're not respecting. And I say, okay, well, like, tell me exactly what you said. And then when they say, I'm like, well, that's not a boundary. You're just kind of asking them if they might be able to stop doing that, if it's okay. That is not setting a boundary. And I think that's what happens in relationships too. It's like, I keep gently saying what I need or what I hope will change. They're not picking up on that. So now I'm getting more resentful. They're getting confused because, I'm not being aggressive. I'm not being assertive. They're viewing me as submissive, but now I'm just starting to get more mad. And then all of a sudden, when you're direct and it's like, this is what I need and this is my boundary, now all of a sudden they're just like, whoa, I've never even heard that before. Like that, I didn't know you needed that. But, by then it's too far gone. And so are you setting a boundary or are you requesting something?
Right.
Yeah. It's always like that email. I'm so guilty of, I'm just checking in.
Yeah.
I always write just.
Yeah.
Or you adjust. And I've tried to take it out and I put it back in, then take it out and put it back in.
I know.
Right? Because you're trying to like lighten the check-in.
I'm like that way with exclamation marks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think women use exclamation marks way more than men do in their emails.
Yeah.
Men rarely, when I get emails from men, there's no exclamation marks.
Because
right?
period.
A woman, there's a happy face.
Yes, period's so aggressive.
Emojis and like you just want to make sure. Just so you know, I know it sounded stern, but that's not how it should come across.
Yeah, proper punctuation seems like angry, and you're definitely mad at me right now. Yeah, and you know what? I think that this is a really great analogy that actually Dr. Becky uses, and I use this to help people in understanding the difference between a request and a boundary. And she said, okay, if you have a small child and they're coloring with markers and you have to go to the bathroom, a request would be, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom now, so please don't draw on the walls while I'm gone.
Right.
Well, when you've said that, you are leaving the power in that other person's hands to decide if they're going to respect what you've asked them or not.
Yeah.
A boundary is, okay, I'm going to take these markers, I'm going to put them up on the fridge because I have to go to the bathroom. And when I get back, I'll give you the markers back and you can continue drawing. You are taking control of the situation. You are not allowing them the opportunity to draw on the walls. You are saying, like, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's what we have to remember in our relationships as well. Are you asking them to do something and just hoping that they will respect you enough and hear you? Or are you saying, like, this is my hard line, and if this happens, then this is the consequence of that?
Right?
And so you're coaching folks on this.
Yes.
This is, yeah. And how, like, women, men, various ages, what are you kind of seeing as, like, commonalities that is a sort of a through line with those that you're working with?
Yeah, it's so interesting, because when I first started getting into this work, I predominantly worked with women, and I sort of assumed through conditioning and maybe societal, what's put on, or even culturally, women are generally more conditioned into people pleasing than men.
Yeah,
But
patriarchy.
yeah,
You know what? I
exactly.
always got to throw it in.
It is. It's so true. It's so true. So I would
We should have
say
a bell.
Yeah.
Patriarchy bell.
Or like a
Yeah,
scoreboard.
exactly.
How many times does Alex bring
I
up
know.
patriarchy?
Yeah, well, it's so true. And I don't think that's wrong. I think that predominantly women do struggle with it more.
Yeah.
But the more that I've started talking about narcissism and narcissistic abuse and the challenges that come with relationships when you are a people pleaser or you do struggle with codependency, so many men struggle with that, but they do it more silently. I think there's an extra level of shame or embarrassment when a man is carrying the people pleasing and the lacking of boundaries and allowing people to hurt them or disrespect them or take advantage
that's
of them.
weakness. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
weak.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can't be a real man if you're weak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think a lot of men do struggle with it, but they just don't talk about it as much.
Yeah. Listen, I know I always shit on the men, but I actually do, like, you're talking about your girlfriends. I have amazing girlfriends in my life. Currently one sitting next to me. We have this ability to talk and to share and to be vulnerable. And we really do a disservice to our boys and our men by not allowing them that. And I'm hopeful that things are changing.
And I get so much fulfillment and my emotion needs met by all the women in my life who I can really confide in.
Yeah.
But because of the way society is constructed, men don't rely on their friends for that.
Such a
right?
shame. And so then they're relying on their partner. So they get into then a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
And this is maybe one area where they can be a little bit more vulnerable, a little, let down their guard.
But maybe it's too much pressure.
But that's a lot for that spouse.
One person, one spouse.
To be their entire emotional, everything. That's just, it's too much. And so I can kind of see the deterioration of relationships in that regard as well.
Yeah.
And just the perspective, like my husband doesn't talk to anybody about anything. And for me, when I'm going through something, I'm like, I got lots of voice notes going with lots of different groups of friends.
Yeah, you gotta hear all
and then
stuff to
hear
say.
it all. Yeah. And then I come out with just like not only a different point of view, but I'm also like inspired and motivated and invigorated. And I'm just like, that's got to be so hard. And I think such a burden that not only my husband, but I think a lot of men carry is that they just don't have that opportunity for reflection or just to hear a different, perspective or side or be like, hey, maybe you're the one that's kind of screwing up right now. You know what I mean? Like when men don't share, they think it's always like the other person's problem. And sometimes when you talk about it, it's like, okay, maybe I was being a little, it offers up like some self-reflection too, right? So that's really important.
Would you recommend over preparing the other person? So for example, hey, I am newly, putting up boundaries. I want you to know that I love you. I'm testing this out. Some may go well, some might go horribly awry, but things might be uncomfortable for the next little bit, but I love you and I know you love me and respect me. And so I want, is that worth it? Or am I now just overthinking all of the,
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think it's good to preface with how much you care and the reason why you're doing these things and that you respect the other person. But I think it's also a great opportunity to share, like, I know my worth now. I know what my needs are. I'm starting to identify these areas in my life where maybe I was sacrificing, but that's not making me happy. And so I want to start asking for more. And that's where the relationship is either going to flourish or it's going to burn because that person should want that for you. They should be like, I'm glad that you're starting to see that and I want you to feel that way and I'm going to, of course I'll do that if that's going to help
support you.
But there's a lot of times in the relationship where unfortunately they just don't they benefited from you not having the boundaries, and they want to continue to do so.
If you have someone in your life who's doing everything for you, why would you want that dynamic to change?
Yeah.
Whereby they're saying no. You're like, oh, but you used to, coordinate all these things for our family and do all the grocery shopping and, whatever things you were doing to people please. And now all of a sudden you're like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm pretty burnt out. Mm-hmm. It's like, what? Now I have to go to my own grocery. Like, you can see where there would be the pushback. Yeah. In an ideal world, that person's like, of course, I love and support you. We'll, good luck on your journey. We'll be here.
Them.
But until it impacts them, and then there's less support, maybe.
And that's the thing. It's like, that was that period I was talking about where there may be a little discomfort or pushback from them, but ultimately they will come around.
Yeah.
So they might initially not like that they're going to have to do these things. And you might be like, how dare they? They're like not respecting my boundaries. But that's just a normal reaction. But at the end of the day, if they come back to you and say, like, okay, now I know how hard you work and I know how stressed you are. And even though it'll be more work for me, I'm happy that we're going to share the load a little bit more, that you'll feel this way. That's the ultimate goal of a relationship. But when a person gets mad, gets defensive, starts saying, belittling you, saying that you don't need these things or that they do so much or whatever, that's when it becomes like a toxic situation.
Yeah. That's the time when you call us.
Yeah.
We'll help you get it.
We'll help you on the other side.
Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you so much for being here.
This was so fun.
So great. So much to think about.
Yeah. So much to work on.
So much to work on.
Yeah. We've got a lot of homework now after this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And we'll put all your info in our show notes so that folks can reach out and get some of your wisdom one-on-one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Breanne. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver, produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.